The new attending called her obsolete to her face in front of the whole night shift, and then he laughed, the way a man laughs when he is certain he will never be wrong. Marian Holloway did not laugh. She did not argue either. She set her worn green logbook down on the nurse's station counter, the cover soft and dog-eared from 38 years of being opened in the dark, and she let the words sit there in the air between them like something he had dropped and would have to pick up himself later. Obsolete? He was 38 years old. She had been a nurse for 38 years. She did the arithmetic in her head quietly, the way she did all her arithmetic, and said nothing about it. Dr. Aaron Vance was the kind of doctor the hospital had started hiring 2 years ago, and he was good at the things the hospital had started caring about. He was fast. He was certain. He could look at a screen full of numbers and tell you, in under a minute, which patient in the ward was trending toward trouble, and he was usually right, and he wanted everyone to know he was usually right. He had come up through programs where the machine spoke first and the nurse spoke second, and he had never once in his career worked a shift where the machine did not speak at all. That was the part nobody understood yet. That was the part Marin understood better than anyone alive in that building, and the part she had stopped trying to explain, because explaining it had only ever made them smile at her, the way you smile at someone's grandmother when she tells you the same story twice. It was a Tuesday in the first week of September, and outside the tall windows of the fourth-floor ward, the sky was the flat, bright white of late summer, hot and ordinary, with a faint green edge along the southern horizon that nobody on the day shift had mentioned. Marin had noticed it at 6 that evening when she walked in. She noticed things. It was the first thing anyone who had ever worked beside her would tell you, said with affection or said with exhaustion depending on the year, that Marin Holloway noticed things. She had noticed the green edge of the sky, and she had noticed on her way up in the elevator that the maintenance crew had propped open the door to the basement generator bay, and she had noticed that the man standing in it was frowning at a clipboard. She filed both of those things away in the same place she filed everything, which was the green logbook and the back of her own steady mind, and she went to work. The ward was 40 beds, and on this night 31 of them were full. 11 of those patients could not breathe on their own. They breathed because a machine breathed for them, a clean, quiet machine at the head of each bed, pushing air into their lungs on a set rhythm, trusted the way you trust a heartbeat you cannot feel. Marin knew all 11 by name. She knew Walt Kessler in bed 12, 78 years old, a retired ferry mechanic 9 days on the ventilator, who squeezed her hand twice, always twice, because 2 squeezes was the most he could manage, and he wanted her to know he meant it. She knew the exact settings on every one of those machines, not because a screen told her, but because she had written them down by hand in the green logbook. At the start of every shift, those people had been hers to keep. That was the thing Aaron Vance had laughed at. He had come around the corner during handoff and seen her writing, and he had tilted his head and said, loud enough for the 3 residents trailing him, "You know the system logs all of that automatically. Every vital, every 15 seconds, you're writing down a copy of a copy." A resident snorted. Marin kept writing because the line she was on was Walt Kessler's, and she did not like to leave a line unfinished. When she was done, she capped the pen, looked up, and said, "I know." Just that. And the flatness of it, the complete absence of any wish to defend herself, made him decide she was slow, when in fact she had simply decided he was not yet worth the breath. He called the logbook a paper museum. That was the phrase he used, that night and other nights, and the residents picked it up the way residents pick up everything an attending says, and within a week the green logbook had a name on the ward, and the name was the museum, and the nurse who carried it had a name too, though they were more careful saying that one where she could hear it, the relic, the night shift relic. If you have ever watched someone good get quietly written off, watched a room decide a person was finished, and start talking over the top of them while they were still standing right there, still doing the work, still better at it than anyone in the room, then you already understand what this channel is for, and you already belong here. Take a moment and subscribe, because the people who do are the people this whole channel was built for. The ones who know that the steadiest hands are usually the ones nobody is looking at. Stay with Marin. What is coming for that hospital is the kind of night that sorts the certain from the capable, and she is the only one in the building who has seen it before. She heard the names anyway. She heard most things. She wrote that down, too, somewhere that was not the logbook, and she kept working, because the work did not care what they called her, and neither, after 38 years, did she. Because she had seen it before. That was the part none of them knew. They saw a quiet woman in her early 60s with silver gray hair pulled back into a low bun, and plain light blue scrubs and soft shoes that made no sound. A woman who wrote in a paper book and ran drills nobody wanted and kept a little hand-crank flashlight clipped to her lanyard like a relic of some older, dimmer world. They did not see the rest. They did not see the version of her that was 26 years old, standing on a different ward in a different decade on the worst night of that hospital's history, when the river came up over the flood wall and the power went and stayed gone, and a woman named Eleanor Price had grabbed her by the arm in the sudden dark and said the only sentence that mattered. They did not know that Eleanor Price had taught her the dark. They did not know that the green logbook on the counter, the one Aaron Vance called a museum, opened on its first water-stained pages to a procedure written in two different hands, hers and Eleanor's, a procedure for keeping people alive when every machine in the building goes silent at once. They did not know, and Marin did not tell them, because some things you do not say. You keep them ready, and you wait, and you hope the night they are for never comes. The night they were for was 4 days away, and it had a name, and the name was already turning slow circles in the warm water far to the south, and on that bright, ordinary Tuesday, not one person on the 4th floor felt it coming except the quiet woman at the counter capping her pen, who had felt it once before in her arm where Eleanor Price had grabbed her, and who looked up again at the green edge of the sky and breathed out slowly and did not say a word. She had been 19 when she first walked onto a hospital ward as something other than a visitor, and the woman who met her at the desk that first morning was Eleanor Price. Eleanor was 51 then, a charge nurse with gray already coming into her hair and a way of standing that made new residents straighten without knowing why. She did not waste words. She looked Marin over once, top to bottom, and said, "You'll be tired in a month and you'll want to quit in 3. Don't decide anything until you've worked a night that goes wrong." Marin had not understood her. She understood that hospitals had good nights and bad nights, busy nights and slow ones, but she did not yet understand that there was a particular kind of night, rare and total, that Eleanor was talking about, the kind that came once in a career if it came at all, and that everything Eleanor would teach her over the next 7 years was secretly aimed at that one night, the way a whole long apprenticeship can be aimed at a single hour. Eleanor taught her the ordinary things first, the way anyone is taught: how to read a face before reading a chart, how to tell the difference between a patient who was frightened and a patient who was failing, because they could look the same from the doorway, and they were not the same at all, how to write things down. That was the one that took. Eleanor wrote everything down in a hard-backed ledger she kept in the pocket of her smock, and when Maureen asked her why, when the hospital already had its forms and its files, Eleanor had said something Marin would remember for 40 years. She said, "The forms are for the hospital. The book is for the patient. The day comes the forms can't be reached. The book is the only thing standing between you and a guess." Marin had thought it was just an old nurse's habit. She bought a green spiral notebook at a drugstore the next week anyway, because she admired Eleanor and wanted to be like her, the way the young do, copying the shape of a thing before they understand the use of it. She understood the use of it on a night in her 7th year, the night Eleanor had been preparing her for the whole time without either of them saying so. It had been raining for 3 days. The river that ran behind the hospital, a slow brown river nobody thought about, had been rising the whole time, and the flood wall that was supposed to hold it had a weakness in it that nobody had known about until the water found it. It found it at 2 in the morning. Marin remembered the exact time because Eleanor had looked at the clock and said it out loud, the way she said everything out loud that mattered, fixing it in the air so the night would have edges later when they tried to remember. 2:04. The lights flickered, came back, flickered again, and then the whole hospital went dark all at once, every floor, every room, a darkness so complete and so sudden that for a moment the only sound in the entire building was the sound of the machines winding down. That was the sound Marin never forgot. Not the dark, the sound the machines made when they died. Each ventilator on the ward had a battery meant to carry it for a few minutes, and the batteries on that ward were old and had not been tested in a year, and one by one they failed. And as each one failed, it gave a single thin alarm and then went silent, and in the silence after each alarm, there was a person who had stopped being breathed for. Eleanor had grabbed Marin by the arm, hard, fingers digging in, the way you grab someone to wake them, and she had said the only sentence that mattered, the sentence Marin would carry for the rest of her life and would one day write on the first page of a green logbook in 2 hands, hers underneath Eleanor's. She said, "The machine is not the air. We are the air. Move." And they had moved. There were no protocols then. Not really. Nothing written for a total failure, because a total failure was the thing that was never supposed to happen. There was only Eleanor, who had thought about it anyway, who had run it in her head 1,000 times the way some people rehearse disasters they pray never come, and who now ran it for real. She put a hand-squeezed resuscitation bag in Marin's hands and showed her, in 10 seconds, the only rhythm that mattered. 1 squeeze, slow, count, release, count, 1 squeeze, slow. The rhythm of a breath made by a human hand. She set the staff in a line down the ward, 1 person to a patient, the nurses and the aides and the one terrified young doctor who did exactly what Eleanor told him because Eleanor was the only person in the building who was not afraid, and they breathed for those patients by hand, in the dark, for 3 hours and 40 minutes, until a portable generator came up the stairs on the backs of 4 firefighters and the machines came back. Every patient on Eleanor's ward lived, every single one. On 2 other floors that night, where there had been no Eleanor, it had gone the other way, and the hospital did not put those numbers in the newspaper, but Eleanor knew them, and she made sure Marin knew them too. "Write it down," Eleanor had told her after, when the lights were back and both of them were sitting on the floor of the supply room with their backs against the shelves, too emptied out to stand. "Everything we did tonight, write it down while you remember the order, because you will not remember the order in a year, and the order is the whole thing. People panic because they don't know what to do first. Give them a first thing and a second thing and a third thing, and they stop panicking and start working. That's all a protocol is. It's permission to stop being afraid." So Marin had written it down that night on the first pages of the green notebook she had bought because she admired an old woman, and Eleanor had read it over and made corrections in her own hand, and that was how the front of the logbook came to be written in 2 hands, a procedure for the dark set down by the only 2 people who had walked through one together and brought everyone out. Eleanor retired 4 years later and died 6 years after that, and at the small service Marin had stood at the back and not said anything, because she was not a person who said things at services, but she had brought the green logbook with her in her bag, and she had thought, the whole time that she was the last one now, the last one who knew the order. She had kept writing in it for 30 more years, every shift, every patient, as Eleanor had taught her, and somewhere in those years the hospital had been rebuilt, and the river had been walled off properly, and the machines had gotten better, and the batteries had gotten better, and a generation of doctors had come up who had never heard the sound of a ward going silent, and did not believe, not really, that it could happen, because it had not happened to them. And the thing that has not happened to you is always somehow the thing that cannot. Marin did not blame them for that. She had been young once, too, and certain, before Eleanor Price grabbed her arm. She only knew something they did not, which was that the river does not care whether you believe in it, and neither does the dark. So she ran the drill. She had run it 4 times a year for 30 years, on the slowest nights, in the small hours when the ward was quiet, and the patients who could sleep were sleeping, and she ran it the way Eleanor had taught her, calmly, by the book, the green logbook open on the counter to the pages she knew by heart. She would gather whoever was on, the nurses and the aides and any resident who could be made to stand still for 20 minutes, and she would say in her flat, even voice, "Total power loss, generators down, what is the first thing?" And she would wait, and someone would fumble it every time because nobody believed in it, and she would not scold them. She would just take them through it, the first thing and the second thing and the third thing, where the manual bags were kept, and how many there were, and which ones had been checked, how to assign one body to one patient, how to keep a count out loud so that nobody's breath got lost, how to triage by hand when the screens that did the triaging were dead. One squeeze, slow, count, release, the rhythm of a breath made by a human hand. She made them feel it in their own hands, every one of them, at least once, because Eleanor had taught her that a thing your hands have done is a thing your hands remember when your mind has gone white with fear. The new ones hated it. Not all of them, but the ones who had come up under Aaron Vance, the ones who measured a shift by how efficient it was, hated the 20 minutes the drill cost them. They had charts to close and orders to enter and 100 small fast tasks that the hospital now counted and graded, and standing in a circle squeezing an empty bag while a woman in her 60s counted to herself was not a thing the hospital counted, and what the hospital did not count, they had been trained to treat as waste. Dr. Spencer Reyes, who was 28 and bright and wanted very badly to be the kind of doctor Aaron Vance was, had said it out loud one night, not cruelly, just thoughtlessly, the way the young say the worst things. He had looked at the bag in his hand and said, "When is the last time this actually happened? Like, ever? We have 3 layers of backup power, the grid, the generators, and the battery on every unit. The odds of all 3," and he had done a little gesture with his free hand, a small dismissive wave, the gesture of a man for whom the odds settled the matter. Marin had let him finish. Then she had said, "The odds were 3 layers the last time, too." And she had taken the bag back from him and checked the seal and set it in its place, and Spencer Reyes had not understood that he had been answered, only that the old woman was, as everyone said, a little stuck in the past. There was one night that summer, a Wednesday in July, that should have told them everything and told them nothing, because they were not the kind to read it. Morin had run the drill at 2 in the morning, the ward quiet, 4 of them in the circle, and she had set them their tasks and timed them with the second hand of the clock over the station, the way she always did, because the order was nothing if it was slow. The first manual bag, seated and breathing, in under 40 seconds from the call. Lanterns lit and placed in under 90. Patients assigned, 1 body to 1 bag. The count started, the whole ward converted from machine to hand in under 4 minutes. They had not made the times. They never made the times the first run of a quarter, and she had taken them through it again, patient, unhurried, the The green logbook opened to the page where Eleanor's hand and her own hand laid out the order step by step, and a young aide, not unkindly, rubbing her eyes, had said, "Maren, no offense, but I could be charting right now. When are we ever going to actually do this?" And Maren had looked at her and at the four of them, and she had not given them the speech because the speech never landed. She had learned that 30 years ago. She had only said, "I hope never. I hope you do this drill every quarter for your whole career and never once do it for real." But I did it for real, once, and I promise you, the people who lived that night did not care how much charting we missed practicing for it. And she had closed the book and let them go back to their screens, and the ward had stayed quiet, and the machines had breathed, and the summer had gone on, bright and certain, and nobody had thought about it again. Nobody but Maren, who thought about it every time she checked the 18 bags, every time she counted the lantern batteries the first of the month, every time the southern sky took on that faint green edge she had learned to read a long time ago. The family saw her differently than the staff did. That was a thing the administration's numbers could not capture and would not have known how to value if they had. Walt Kessler's daughter, a tired woman in her 50s who drove 2 hours each way to sit with her father on the nights she could, had stopped Maren in the hall one evening in August and taken both her hands and said, "You're the one he talks about. On his good days, when the tube's out for a while, he talks. And it's never the doctors. It's the night nurse who squeezes his hand back. He says you always squeeze back twice." And Maren had said, because it was true, "He squeezes twice. So I squeeze twice. That's just how he and I talk." And the daughter had started to cry, the way exhausted people cry, easily and without shame, and she had said, "Don't ever let them get rid of you. Whatever they're planning, don't let them." And Maren had not answered that, because she had read the memo, and she knew what they were planning, and she did not lie to families. She had only held the woman's hands a moment longer, and then gone to listen to Walt Kessler's breath sounds, which were, that night, a little worse than they had been the night before, the lungs stiffening the way old lungs do, so that when the worst night came, he would be the hardest one on the ward to keep alive by hand, the one she would have to take herself. What none of them knew, because Maureen did not advertise it, was that she was right about the layers in a way that was about to matter very much. The hospital had spent the better part of 2 years and a great deal of money replacing its old emergency systems with new ones, and the centerpiece of that replacement was a pair of generators, big, new, clean machines that sat in a bay in the basement and were, on paper, more than enough to run the entire building through any failure of the public grid. They had been installed that spring. There had been a small ceremony. Gregory Lindqvist, the operations administrator, had stood in front of them in his charcoal suit and said the word redundancy 4 times in 2 minutes, and a photograph had been taken, and everyone had felt very safe. And it was true that the new generators were good machines. The problem was not the machines. The problem was where the fuel that fed them had to come from and how it got there, and that was a detail buried so deep in the building's plans that exactly one person in the hospital had ever thought to ask about it, and that person was Maren Holloway, and when she had asked, she had been told kindly not to worry about it. She had asked Gregory Lindqvist directly, in the spring, the week the generators were installed. She had gone down to his office on her own time before a shift, the green logbook under her arm, and she had asked him a simple question. The fuel transfer pumps, the ones that move diesel from the storage tank to the generators, where are they? And Lindqvist, who was not a bad man, only a tired one, a man who managed a building the way you manage a thing too large to hold in your mind all at once, had pulled up a drawing on his screen and looked and said, "Lower level, sub-basement, the equipment bay off the east stair." Why? And Marin had looked at the drawing for a long moment and said, That bay flooded in the spring of 1991. I was here. The water came up the east stair. And Lindqvist had said gently, the way you talk to someone whose worry has outlived its facts. Marin, that was 35 years ago. The flood wall's been rebuilt. The whole drainage system was redone in 2004. That can't happen now. And she had said, the pumps are below the line the water reached. And he had said, it can't reach that line now. And there had been nothing more to say because he was certain, and she was only a nurse who remembered a flood. And the two of them looked at the same drawing and saw two completely different buildings, his made of plans and hers made of water. She wrote it in the logbook that night. Not a complaint. She did not file complaints. She had learned long ago that complaints from night shift nurses went into a drawer and stayed there. She just wrote it down, the way Eleanor had taught her, because the book was for the patient and the day might come the forms could not be reached. Fuel transfer pumps, East Equipment Bay, sub-basement, below the 1991 line. She wrote it the way you write down the name of a thing you hope you are wrong about. And then she turned the page and went back to work, and the summer wore on, hot and bright and ordinary, and the generators sat in their bay looking like safety, and far to the south, over water, the temperature of bath water, the air began to turn. The pressure on Moraine herself had been building too, all that year, quieter than the storm, but aimed at her just as surely. It came from above, from the same place the new machines and the new doctors came from, the place where a hospital is a set of numbers that have to come out right. Marin was expensive. That was the truth underneath all the other truths. She was at the very top of the pay scale, 38 years in, and a nurse 2 years out of school cost the hospital a great deal less and closed charts faster and never spent 20 minutes running a drill for a disaster that the administration had, on paper, just spent 2 years making impossible. Nobody said this to her in those words. What they said was softer and worse. They talked about modernization. They talked about a night shift model that leaned on the new monitoring system, the one that watched every patient automatically and called a doctor when a number drifted, the system that made an experienced night nurse, in the words of a memo Marin was not supposed to see but saw anyway, a redundancy the new architecture could absorb. Redundancy, the same word Lindqvist had used about the generators, used now about her. Marin had read the memo standing at the counter at 3 a.m, the ward quiet around her, and she had felt something go still and cold in her chest. Not surprise, she was past surprise, but a kind of recognition, the feeling of watching a thing you have seen coming for a long time finally arrive. They were going to retire the drill. They were going to thin the night shift. And they were, she understood, going to retire her gently with a card and a cake and a speech about her decades of service, and they were going to do it believing sincerely that they were making the hospital safer because they had replaced everything she knew with a machine and a generator and a younger pair of hands, and they could not see? None of them could see. The one place where all three of those things led down the same east stair into the same water. She closed the memo. She picked up her pen. She opened the green logbook to Walt Kessler's line because it was time for his settings, and she wrote them down in her small, even hand, and her hand did not shake because she was at work, and at work her hands never shook. That was for later. That was for the supply room floor, if it came to that. For now there was the next necessary thing, and the next necessary thing was Walt Kessler's 4 o'clock breath sounds, and she went and listened to them, and the storm 300 miles to the south turned its slow circles and gathered its strength and began, at last, to move toward the coast. By Friday, the storm had a category, and the city had a warning, and the hospital did what hospitals do, which is prepare for everyone else's emergency while pretending it cannot have one of its own. They discharged the patients who could be discharged. They canceled what could be canceled. They topped off the diesel tank in the sub-basement, and they tested the new generators, and the generators ran beautifully for the 15 minutes of the test, clean and strong, and Gregory Lindquist sent an email to the whole staff with the word prepared in the subject line. What they did not do was move the fuel transfer pumps, because nobody but Marin thought the fuel transfer pumps were a problem, and Marin had been told kindly not to worry about it. They did not run the manual blackout drill either. It had been quietly dropped from the schedule that month, part of the modernization, and when Marin had asked Spencer Reyes whether they ought to run it once more before the storm, just in case, he had given her a small apologetic smile, the smile of a young man embarrassed on an old woman's behalf, and said, "I think we're covered, Marin. The generators are rated for the whole building. We're good." And he had meant it kindly, and that was the worst part, that all of it was meant kindly. If you have made it this far into Marin's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Aaron Vance was less kind. He came onto the ward Friday evening to check the ventilated patients before the storm, and he found Marin counting the manual resuscitation bags in the supply closet, laying them out on the shelf in a row, checking each seal, the green logbook open on the counter beside her with a tally going down the page. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, and then he said, with that certainty of his that was almost a kind of innocence, "You really think you're going to need those?" Not a question. Marin did not look up from the bag in her hands. "I think I'd rather have counted them and not need them," she said, "than need them and not have counted them." And Aaron Vance had laughed, the same laugh from the first night, the laugh of a man who has never heard the machines wind down, and he had said the thing that the whole ward would remember him for later, the thing that would go around the hospital in the weeks after in a hush. He said, "Marin, the day this hospital needs you to squeeze a bag by hand to keep someone alive is the day the whole system has already failed, and the system is not going to fail." And he had clapped her once on the shoulder, the way you reassure someone, and walked out, and Marin had finished counting the bags. There were 18 of them. She wrote the number down. 18 bags, 11 ventilated patients. She underlined it once and went back to work. She did her own preparation that Friday and Saturday, the kind nobody assigned and nobody noticed, the kind that does not show up in a number. She walked the supply closet and laid the 18 bags out on the second shelf in a row where a person reaching in the dark could find them by touch and count them by touch. She checked every lantern in the east stair closet and changed the batteries in 2 that had gone soft, and she set the headlamps where the bottom bin met the wall so they would be the first thing a hand found. She filled a steel pitcher with water and set it behind the counter because she remembered from the flood that the thing nobody plans for in a long emergency is that the people doing the work get thirsty, and a person with burning arms and a dry mouth makes mistakes a person with a sip of water does not. She did not tell anyone she was doing these things. She had learned long ago that preparation done quietly is preparation that does not get argued with. And she opened the green logbook on the counter on Saturday evening before her shift, and she read the front pages one more time, the order in 2 hands, not because she did not know it. She knew it like she knew her own name, but the way you touch a railing in the dark to be sure it is where you left it. Then she closed the book and clipped her crank flashlight to her lanyard and went up to the 4th floor, where 11 people were breathing by machine, and the rain had just begun to lean against the windows, and she said good evening to Theo and to Walt Kessler, and she began, as she had begun 10,000 times, to take report and to write it down. The strange thing, the thing she would turn over in her mind for a long time afterward, was how ordinary the hours before were. The ward was calm. The new attending was efficient, and the resident was eager, and the machines breathed their steady, borrowed breaths, and the only person in the entire building who felt the weight of what was coming was a woman they had voted, in a memo she was not supposed to see, to make redundant. She felt it the way she felt a chest about to turn, a patient about to fail before the numbers caught up, a sense in the body older and faster than thought. She kept it to herself. There was nothing to say that she had not already said and been smiled at for saying. So she did the only useful thing, which was to be ready, completely ready, every bag counted and every lantern charged and the order fresh in her mind and the steel pitcher full behind the counter, and to wait, calm and quiet on the surface, for the night to either come or not come. By 9 the wind had teeth. By 10 the city beyond the glass had begun to go dark in patches, whole neighborhoods winking out as the grid failed block by block, and Marin stood at the window with the logbook in her hand and watched the dark spread toward the hospital across the drowning city, and she breathed out, slow, and she did not say a word. The storm came ashore Saturday night, and it came harder than the forecast had promised, the way the bad ones always seem to, as if the number on the map had been a kind of bargaining, and the storm had refused the deal. By 9 in the evening, the wind off the water had teeth in it, and the rain did not fall so much as drive sideways, and the tall windows of the fourth-floor ward, which by day showed a calm blue sky, now showed nothing but a streaming gray wall lit white every few seconds by lightning that left the whole ward printed for an instant on the eye. Marin had come in at 6, as always, and she had not been surprised to find the ward short-staffed, because the city was flooding and people could not get in, and she had not been surprised to find that the resident on with her was Spencer Reyes, looking younger than usual, or that the attending covering the floor was Aaron Vance, who had stayed because staying was the kind of thing he believed about himself, and who was, to his credit, good in the ordinary chaos of a storm night, fast and clear and everywhere at once. 11 patients still breathed by machine. Walt Kessler squeezed her hand twice when she came by his bed at 8, and she squeezed back twice and told him the storm was loud but the ward was warm, and he was safe, and he believed her, because for 38 years patients had believed Marin Holloway when she told them they were safe, and for 38 years she had made it true. At 11 minutes past 10 the public power failed. It did not flicker first. It simply stopped, the whole grid going down across that quarter of the city at once as a substation drowned, and for 1/2 of 1 second the ward was utterly black and utterly silent, and in that half-second Marin Holloway was 19 again, with Eleanor Price's fingers digging into her arm. Then the new generators caught, exactly as designed, and the lights came back, not the full bright lights, but the emergency circuit, a calmer amber glow from every third fixture, and the ventilators, which had ridden their internal batteries through the gap without missing a breath, kept breathing, and a ragged little cheer went up from the staff at the station. Spencer Reyes actually laughed with relief. Aaron Vance caught Marin's eye across the ward and did not say anything, but his face said it. His face said, "See, the system held, the way it always holds." And Marin did not answer the look, because she was listening to something underneath the wind, a sound from very far down in the building, and the sound was wrong. It was the sound of the generators laboring, not running clean the way they had in the 15-minute test, but surging and dropping, the sound of an engine being starved. Marin knew that sound the way she knew the sound of a chest that was filling with fluid, knew it in her body before her mind had finished naming it, and her mind, when it caught up, named it in 4 words she had written in the logbook in the spring: the fuel transfer pumps. Down in the East Equipment Bay, Below the line the water had reached in 1991, the storm surge had come up the drainage system the way she had said it could, slow and patient and rising, and it had reached the bay, and it had reached the pumps, and the pumps had shorted and stopped, and now the two big clean generators upstairs were running on only the diesel that was left in their own small day tanks, the fuel that could not be replaced because the pumps that replaced it were underwater. The generators were not failing because they were bad machines. They were failing because they were thirsty, and the water that should never have been able to reach them was, at that moment, 20 feet below Moran's soft white shoes, drinking the hospital's last redundancy one pump at a time. She did the arithmetic. She always did the arithmetic. A day tank that size, 2 generators pulling from it under full ward load, no resupply. Minutes, not hours, minutes, and not many of them, and then the same darkness she had stood in once before, except this time there was no Eleanor Price to grab her arm, because this time she was the one who knew the order, she was the last one, and the realization did not frighten her, which surprised her a little, even then. It steadied her. It was almost, she would think later, like being handed back something she had been carrying toward this night for 40 years, without ever being sure why. She walked to the counter, unhurried, her shoes silent on the floor, and she picked up the green logbook, the one Aaron Vance called the museum, and she opened it to the first water-stained pages, the ones written in 2 hands, hers underneath Eleanor's, and she laid her palm flat on them for 1 second, the way you might lay a hand on a shoulder, and then she turned and raised her voice for the first time anyone on that ward had ever heard her raise it, and she said, "Everyone, listen to me. We are about to lose all power, and the machines are not the air. We are the air. Move." For a moment nobody moved. They looked at her, the handful of staff at the station, the way you look at someone who has said something that does not fit the room, and Aaron Vance opened his mouth, and what he said was, "Marin, the generators are running. Listen, you can hear them." And that was exactly when the generators stopped. Both of them, the surging cut off mid-surge, the amber emergency lights dying as the words left his mouth, and the ventilators on their last battery seconds giving, one after another down the ward, that thin single alarm, and then the silence Marin had carried in her body for 35 years, 11 times over, 11 machines winding down, 11 people who in the space of a few minutes would stop being breathed for. The ward went black. Outside the lightning printed the windows white and then took them away again. And in the dark, before anyone could find the bottom of their own fear, there was Marin's voice, completely level, and the click of the little hand-crank flashlight on her lanyard, a small cold beam swinging up to light her own face from below so they could all see her, find her, fix on her. "Listen to my voice," she said. "Do exactly what I say, in the order I say it, and everyone on this ward lives. Dr. Vance, there are 18 manual bags in the supply closet, second shelf. I counted them 4 hours ago. Go, bring all of them. Dr. Reyes, the storage closet by the east stair, has lanterns and headlamps. The battery kind, bottom bin. I check them the first of every month. Go, Theo." And Theodora Okafor, the night nurse who had worked beside Marin for 6 years and who, alone of all of them, had not frozen, was already moving, already at the first bed, her own penlight in her teeth, and she called back through it, "I'm here, Marin. Tell me." And Marin said, "Bed 1. Find the bag valve, seat the mask, 2 hands. I'm coming to set your rhythm." And the ward, which a moment before had been 11 dying machines and a clutch of frightened people, began, under the sound of one steady voice, to become something else. She had them moving inside 30 seconds. It was the drill. It was the drill they had hated. The 20 wasted minutes 4 times a year, except now it was not wasted and it was not a drill, and their hands, which their minds had refused to believe would ever need this, remembered. That was the thing Eleanor had promised her 40 years before on the floor of a supply room. A thing your hands have done is a thing your hands remember when your mind has gone white. Spencer Reyes came pounding back from the east stair with his arms full of lanterns and his glasses askew, and his face the face of a man who has just understood all at once a thing he was told and did not believe, and he set the lanterns down the center of the ward with shaking hands, and the warm light bloomed up the room, and in that light Marin was already at bed 3, her hands over a young ade's hands on the bag, counting. 1, slow, let it rise, and release, and 2, slow. You feel that? That little resistance? That's the lung filling. That's the whole job. You are his lungs now. 1, slow. The aide was crying and squeezing in perfect time, both at once, and Marin said, not unkindly, without stopping the count, "Crying's fine. The count is what matters. 1, slow," and moved to the next bed. Aaron Vance came back with the bags. He stood in the swinging lantern light with 18 manual resuscitation bags in his arms, the bags he had laughed at 4 hours ago, the bags whose existence he had called proof that the system had already failed, and the system had already failed, exactly as he had said. The day the hospital needed Marin to squeeze a bag by hand had come. It had come that very night, and he stood there, holding the proof of his own certainty in his 2 arms, and for a moment he could not move at all. And Marin looked up at him from bed 5, where her hands were on a patient's bag, and she did not say any of the things she could have said. She did not say, "I told you." She did not say the day came. She said, "Dr. Vance, I need you. You're the fastest hands in this building, and I have 11 patients and not enough people. Take bed 7 and bed 8. They're close enough to bridge. 1 bag in each hand. Alternate the rhythm. I'll show you once." And something broke open in Aaron Vance's face, something that was not quite shame and was deeper than shame, and he put down the bags, and he knelt between bed 7 and bed 8, and he held out his hands and said, "Show me." And the old night shift relic showed the young attending how to breathe a human being, and he learned it in 10 seconds, because he was, in fact, very good, and she had always known he was very good. That had never been the thing. It was somewhere in the first wild half hour, going back to the supply closet for the spare lantern batteries, that Marin found the letter. She kept the logbook in her bag between shifts and brought it out at the counter each night, and in the scramble she had jammed it into the deep pocket of her scrub top. And now, as she reached past it for the batteries her fingers found, tucked into the back pages where she had slid it years ago and half forgotten it, a single folded sheet of paper gone soft at the creases. She knew it by touch before she knew it by sight. She had not read it in a long time because she did not need to, because she had it the way you have the things that have become part of the wall you are built around. It was the letter Eleanor Price had written her, the last year of Eleanor's life, and given to her folded with the instruction not to read it until she needed it, and Marin had read it once, years ago, and decided she did not yet need it, and put it away. And here it was, surfacing on the one night it had always been for. She did not have time to read it. She had 11 patients breathing by hand, and a storm trying to take the roof off. But she held it for 1 second in the lantern light, this soft folded thing, and she breathed out, and she put it in her breast pocket where she could feel it, and she went back out to the ward, and she carried Eleanor with her into the dark the way Eleanor had once carried her. The math of the night was cruel and simple, and Marin had run it before her feet had finished crossing the ward. 11 patients who could not breathe on their own, 1 bag each, and a bag is 2 hands, and a human being who is squeezing a bag correctly cannot also be doing anything else, cannot leave, cannot rest the arms that are already within 10 minutes beginning to burn. And she had, counting everyone, 9 people, 9 pairs of hands for 11 patients, and 2 of those 9 were aides who had never done this outside a drill, and 1 was a resident who had believed until 40 minutes ago that this could not happen, and the hours until help could reach them through a flooded city were not hours she could count on, because she did not know how many they were. This was the part no machine could do, and it was the part Marin had been quietly the best in the building at for 38 years, and almost nobody had ever seen it, because the nights it mattered were the nights nobody was watching. It was not the squeezing of the bag. Anyone could be taught to squeeze a bag. It was the seeing of the whole ward at once, the holding of 11 lives and 9 bodies, and a falling number of minutes all in one mind, and the deciding, over and over, calmly, of the next necessary thing. She bridged where she could. Beds 7 and 8 close enough for Vance to work both. Beds 2 and 3 for Theo, who had the steadiest hands of the younger ones and did not need watching. She put the 2 aides on the 2 patients whose lungs were the most forgiving and stood near enough to fix their rhythm with a word. She took the hardest one herself, bed 12, Walt Kessler, whose 9 days on the machine had left his lungs stiff and slow to fill, who needed a longer, gentler squeeze and a sharper eye, and she set Spencer Reyes beside her on bed 11, where she could teach him without leaving Walt. And she kept the count for the whole ward out loud, a slow, steady cadence under the storm, so that even the people she was not standing beside could breathe their patient in time with her voice. 1, slow, and release, and 2. The wind screamed at the windows, and the rain came in sheets, and the lightning lit them all in white stutters. 9 people in a row of warm lantern light squeezing breath into 11 chests, and over it all 1 voice, never rising, never breaking, counting them through. The first crisis came at the 40-minute mark, and it was Walt. Marin felt it before any monitor would have told her, because there were no monitors. There was only her hand on the bag and her eyes on his face, and his face had gone a color she did not like, and the bag in her hand had begun to fight her, the lung pushing back harder than it should, not feeling right. She knew it in her body, the way she had always known things. His airway was plugging, the secretions building with no machine to clear them, and if she stopped breathing him to clear it, he lost ground he might not get back, and if she did not clear it, the breaths stopped doing their work. This was the kind of 'too bad choices' moment that the whole apparatus of the modern hospital existed to take off a nurse's shoulders, and the whole apparatus of the modern hospital was, at that moment, under 20 feet of nothing, and the choice was hers. She made it in the time it takes to make a choice you have already made 1,000 times in your sleep. "Dr. Reyes," she said, "take Walt's bag, my rhythm exactly. Do not change it. I am going to suction him by hand, and you are going to keep him alive for 90 seconds while I do." And Spencer Reyes, who that morning had wondered out loud when this had ever happened, put his hands on Walt Kessler's bag and breathed for him. Perfectly, his jaw set, his eyes wet behind the crooked glasses, while Marin cleared the old man's airway with a hand pump and a steady hand, and Walt's color came back, and the bag stopped fighting, and she took it back from Spencer and said only, "Good, that's the job. You just did the job." And the young man made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else, and did not let go of the rhythm on his own patient. Time did a strange thing in that ward, the way it does in any true emergency, stretching and folding so that a minute could last an hour and an hour could vanish. Marin had no monitors and no clock she could spare a glance for, so she kept time the only way that mattered, by the breath, by the count, 1 and slow and release and 2, and she let the count be the clock for all of them. She had learned that on the flood night, too. You do not tell frightened people how long they have been working, or how much longer they might have to, because the numbers crush them. You give them the next breath, just the next breath, and then the one after that. A person can always manage the next breath, and if you string enough next breaths together, you get through a night that would have broken anyone who tried to face the whole of it at once. So she did not say, 4 hours, we may be here 4 hours. She said, one, slow, and release. And the ward breathed, and the storm hammered the glass, and the hours went by one breath at a time. The woman in bed 7 nearly died at what Marin would later learn was midnight. She was one of the two Aaron Vance was bridging, and the trouble was not the bagging. The bagging was fine. The trouble was her heart, which the strain of the night and the loss of her drips had pushed toward a rhythm that would not hold. Marin saw it from across the ward, saw it in the woman's face and in the change in Vance's posture, the sudden stillness of a man who has realized the person in front of him is slipping in a way that the bag in his hands cannot fix. "Talk to me," Marin called, already crossing to them, and Vance said, low and fast, the certainty gone, just a good doctor frightened for a patient, "She's throwing PVCs, a lot of them. I don't have a monitor. I don't have a line. I don't have—" And Marin put 2 fingers on the woman's neck and felt the chaos under the skin and did the arithmetic, the cruel, simple arithmetic of a ward with no machines. And she said, "Keep bagging bed 8. I have her." And she did the thing there was to do, which was old and physical and required no electricity, a steady hand and a hard decision, and the deep knowledge of a body under strain that 38 years had put in her bones. And she talked to the woman the whole time in a low, even voice. "You're all right. Stay with me. You're all right," even though the woman could not answer, because Marin had learned a long time ago that the last sense to leave is hearing, and the first medicine is not to be alone in the dark, and the rhythm steadied. It steadied under her hands as Walt's airway had cleared an hour before, not because of a machine, but because of a person who knew what to do and did it without hesitating. And the woman in bed 7 kept breathing, and Aaron Vance, breathing bed 8 beside her, watched the whole thing out of the corner of his eye and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, because he had just watched a nurse he had called Obsolete hold a human heart in a steady rhythm with her hands and her voice and 40 years of knowing, and the word he had used for her was coming apart in his mouth even as he kept the count. There were quieter minutes, too, scattered through the long dark, and those were almost harder, because in the quiet the fear had room to come back. In one of them, Theo, bagging steadily 2 beds down, said into the lantern light, not really a question, "We're going to make it, aren't we?" And Marin, without looking up from her own count, said, "Yes, we're going to make it, every one of them." And she said it not because she knew it, because nobody could know it, but because Theo needed it to be said by someone whose voice did not shake, and that was a thing Maureen could give, the same thing Eleanor had given her, a borrowed certainty to lean on until your own came back. That was the secret nobody put in the protocols, and no machine could supply. Half of what an experienced nurse does in the dark is simply refuse, out loud, to be afraid, so that the people around her can borrow the steadiness until they find their own. She had been borrowing Eleanor's for 35 years. She had enough now to lend. That was the hour, over and over. 11 patients, 9 bodies, the burning arms, the rotations Marin called so no one's hands gave out at once, the lantern batteries she had checked the first of every month for 30 years, and which now, because she had checked them, did not die. She rotated herself through the hardest beds, and she walked the line constantly, and she never stopped the count. And somewhere in there, Aaron Vance, breathing 2 patients at once with sweat running down his face, said to her as she passed, low, just to her, "How long can you do this?" And she said, without slowing, "As long as it takes. I've done 3 hours and 40 minutes before. We'll do longer tonight if we have to." And he stared at her. This woman in her 60s he had called obsolete, who had apparently done this before, who had a number, 3 hours and 40 minutes, a number that meant there had been a night, a real night, that she had carried inside her the whole time he had been laughing. And he understood, kneeling there with a stranger's life in each hand, that he had been wrong about her in a way so total that he did not yet have the room in himself to feel the whole size of it. He would later. For now there was the count, and he matched it, and he breathed. It was past midnight, in a lull when Theo had taken over Walt's bag, and the worst of the burning had eased into a grim, steady rhythm, that Marin let herself, for 90 seconds, lean against the wall by the supply closet and take the letter out of her breast pocket and read it by the crank light, because something had told her it was time, and the thing that told her was the same thing that had always told her things, and she had learned a long time ago to listen to it. Eleanor's handwriting was on the page, the same hand that was on the front of the logbook, smaller now and shakier with the illness that would take her, but unmistakably Eleanor. It said, "Marin, if you are reading this, then the night has come that I always told you about, the one I spent 7 years getting you ready for, and I am not there, and you are the one they are all looking at now. So let me tell you the thing I never said out loud, because you were young, and I did not want it to go to your head, and then you were not young, and I had waited too long, the way we always do. You were the best I ever trained. Not the fastest, not the loudest, never the one they noticed in the room, the best. Because you noticed things and you stayed calm when calm was the rarest thing in the building, and you understood, the way almost no one understands, that the machines are not the medicine and the medicine is not the care. The care is a person deciding again and again to do the next necessary thing for someone who cannot do it for themselves. That is all it has ever been. They will forget that in the years after I'm gone. They will build wonderful machines, and they will start to believe the machines are the thing, and they will look at women like you and me and think we are what is left over, the part they have not automated yet. Let them think it. Keep the book. Run the drill even when they laugh, especially when they laugh. And on the night the machines go quiet, when everyone who called you obsolete is standing in the dark with their hands empty, you will open your mouth and the order will come out, because I put it there and you kept it, and you will bring them all home. You were never the part that was left over, Marin. You were always the part that was load-bearing. They just could not see the weight until the night it was the only thing holding the roof up. I am so proud of you. Now cap this letter and go back to work. There are people waiting on your hands." Maureen read it once. Her own hands, which had not shaken all night, shook now, just once, just for a moment, here against the wall where no patient could see, the way Eleanor had taught her that grief and fear are real and have their place, and their place is not in front of the people who are counting on you. She folded the letter along its soft creases. She put it back in her breast pocket. She breathed out, slow, one long breath, the kind she had been letting out on this ward for 38 years, and then she pushed off the wall and went back to the count, because Eleanor was right. There were people waiting on her hands, and the storm was not finished, and neither was she. The second hour was harder than the first because the bodies were failing now, not the patients but the people breathing them, the arms going from burning to numb, the minds slipping toward the kind of exhausted error that kills. Marin felt the ward starting to fray, reading it in 100 small signs that added up to one bad direction, and she did the only thing there was to do, which was to become, herself, the part of every person on that ward that had not yet given out. She moved constantly now, taking a bag for 10 breaths to let an aide shake the feeling back into her arms, calling the rotations tighter, putting her own steadiness into the count so the count could hold the people up. She gave Spencer Reyes 30 seconds sitting on the floor with his head down and then put him back in. She made Aaron Vance drink water from a bottle she held to his mouth because his hands were full of 2 other people's lives. She told Theo she was doing beautifully, and she was. And when one of the aides, a young woman of maybe 23, finally cracked, the tears turning into the gulping panic that loses the rhythm, Marin knelt right down in front of her, face to face in the lantern light, and put her own hands over the young woman's hands on the bag, and said very quietly, just to her, under the count she somehow kept going for everyone else at the same time, "Look at me. You are not alone in this. I have done this before, and we did not lose anyone, and we are not going to lose anyone tonight. Breathe with me. 1, slow." And the young aide breathed, and the rhythm came back, and she did not crack again because someone who had been there before had told her, in the dark, that the dark ended. That was the thing Marin had that no machine and no protocol and no amount of certainty could supply. She had been there before. She knew the dark ended, and she could put that knowledge into a frightened person's hands like a current, and it held them up. The second crisis was bigger than the first, and it was the storm itself. Sometime past 1, the wind found a weakness in the old part of the roof, 2 floors up, and water began to come down through the ceiling at the far end of the ward, not over the patients, but close enough that the lanterns guttered and a panel of the drop ceiling came down with a crash, and a sheet of cold rain swept across 3 of the beds. For 1 second the panic came back into the room all at once, that animal lurch, and 3 people lost their count. And Marin's voice cut straight through it, not louder, just absolutely certain, the certainty itself a kind of light. Leave it. The water is not your patient. The bag in your hand is your patient. Find your rhythm. 1, slow, and release. Theo, move bed 11 6 feet left, away from the leak. Keep bagging while you roll. Dr. Vance, you're dry where you are. Hold your 2. Everyone else, eyes on your own hands, ears on my voice. 1, slow. And the room came back. It came back because she did not let it go. She had learned on a night 35 years before that in a true emergency, the most valuable thing in the building is one person who refuses to be afraid out loud, and she had spent 38 years becoming that person without anyone noticing. And now, in the worst hour of the worst night that hospital had seen since the flood, every single life in that ward hung on the steadiness of a woman they had called a relic, and the steadiness held because she held it, because Eleanor had held it for her once, and she had been paying it forward in the dark ever since. There was a low point, near 2 in the morning, that Marin would not talk about much afterward, because there was nothing to say about it that did not sound like more than it was. The arms were failing all down the line. 2 of the lanterns had been switched to their dimmer setting to save what was left of the batteries. The storm had not eased at all, and the part of Marin's mind that did arithmetic had quietly run the numbers on how much longer 9 exhausted bodies could keep 11 patients breathing, and the numbers were not good, and for the length of 2 breaths, no longer, she let herself look at the doors at the end of the ward and want, with everything in her, for them to open. That was all. 2 breaths of wanting to be rescued. Then she put it down, the way you put down anything you cannot use, and she went back to the count, because Eleanor had taught her the last and hardest part of the order, the part that was not written in the book because it could not be, that the person holding the ward together does not get to fall apart while there is still a single patient breathing by hand, that her own fear and her own exhaustion and her own wanting were luxuries for later, for the supply room floor, for after. So she breathed them through it. She took the worst beds herself. She lent her steadiness down the line until there was almost none left in her, and then she found a little more, the way you always can, and she did not let the doors at the end of the ward mean anything, and the night went on. They came at 20 minutes to 3. Marn heard them before she saw them, boots on the east stair, many of them, and then the doors banged open and the firefighters were there, 4 of them, soaked and enormous in their gear, carrying a portable generator on a wheeled frame and coils of heavy cable, and behind them 2 paramedics with more battery packs, and the sight of them coming through the doors was the single most familiar thing that had happened to Marin in 35 years, because she had seen it once before, this exact thing, men coming up a stairwell with a generator on their backs while nurses breathed patients by hand in the dark, and for one disorienting second the 2 nights folded into one, and she was 19 and 61 at the same time. The lead firefighter took one look at the ward, at the lanterns and the line of people bagging, and the calm of it, the strange, terrible calm of a room that was supposed to be a catastrophe and was instead a procedure, and he found the person who was obviously in charge, who was obviously the center the whole room was organized around, and it was not the attending physician, and it was not the resident. It was a silver-haired nurse in plain blue scrubs with a crank light on her lanyard, and he went straight to her and said, "Ma'am, where do you want us?" "Where do you want us?" To the nurse, with the doctors standing right there, and Marin said without a flicker, already pointing, "Power that wall first, the 3 closest ventilators, then work down the line. I'll tell you the order. Do not pull anyone off a bag until their machine is up, and I have seen it cycle twice." And the firefighters did exactly what she said, in the order she said it, because she was the one who knew the order, and one by one down the ward the ventilators came back to life, and each time a machine took over a breath that a human hand had been making, the hand that had been making it could finally stop, and the person attached to it sat down hard on the floor and shook. Every patient lived, all 11. Marin went down the line herself as each ventilator came up and confirmed it with her own hands and her own eyes, trusting nothing she had not checked. And at bed 12, Walt Kessler, back on his machine, his color good, his airway clear, found her hand with his and squeezed it. Twice, always twice. And Marin held his hand and squeezed back, twice, and said, "I know, Walt, I know. You did good. You rest now." And the old ferry mechanic closed his eyes, and somewhere in Marin's chest the thing that had been holding for 5 hours let go by one notch. Just one, because the job was not done until the last machine cycled twice, and there were still beds to confirm. She did not weep. She did not sit down. She finished the line. Then she walked back to the counter in the returning light, picked up the green logbook, opened it, and in her small, even hand, which was steady again, she began to write down what had happened, the order of it, while she still remembered the order, because the order was the whole thing, and because the book was for the patient, and because somewhere a young nurse none of them had met yet would someday stand in a dark ward, and the order would need to be there, written down in more than one hand. The vindication, when it came, did not look like the thing people imagine when they imagine being proven right. There was no moment when the room turned to her and applauded, no speech, no apology delivered on one knee. It was quieter than that, and because it was quieter, it was truer, and it began while she was still writing in the logbook at the counter in the gray light before dawn. Aaron Vance came and stood near her. He did not say anything for a while. He had the look of a man who has been taken apart and is not sure how he goes back together, his coat soaked through, his fast, certain hands hanging empty at his sides for the first time all night, and finally he said, not loudly, "I counted them with my own hands. 2 patients for 4 hours, and I have never been so—" And he stopped, because the word was not a word he was used to needing. "I didn't know it could happen," he said instead. "I knew it in theory. I didn't know it. You knew it." And Marin kept writing for a moment, finishing the line, because she did not like to leave a line unfinished, and then she capped her pen and looked at him, and what she felt, looking at him, was not triumph. It surprised her, even then. It was something closer to recognition, the way Eleanor must have looked at her once. He was good. He had always been good. He had only been certain, as certain as she had been at his age, before a woman grabbed her arm in the dark. "Now you know it," she said. "That was all. Not I told you. Not the day came like you said it would. Just, now you know it?" And she watched him take the weight of that, the whole size of it, the thing he had called obsolete turning over in front of him into the thing that had held the roof up. And she let him have it without making it cost him more than it already had, because that was what Eleanor would have done, and because the satisfaction she had spent 38 years not needing she did not, it turned out, need now either. Spencer Reyes did not have Vance's restraint. He found her near the supply closet as the day staff began, at last, to fight their way in through the wreckage of the city, and he stood in front of her with his glasses still crooked and his eyes red, and he said, all in a rush, "I asked you when this had ever happened. Do you remember? Friday. I stood there and I asked you when this had ever happened, like it was a stupid drill, and you said the odds were 3 layers the last time too, and I didn't even—" And his voice broke, and he pressed the back of his hand to his mouth, this bright young man who had wanted so badly to be certain, and Marin put a hand on his arm, the way a woman had once put a hand on hers, and she said, "You did the job tonight, Spencer. When it was real, you did the job. That's the only test that ever counted, and you passed it. The rest is just learning. You're going to be very good." And she meant it, every word, and Spencer Reyes would carry that sentence for the rest of his career, as Marin had carried Eleanor's, and he would in fact become very good, and 20 years on he would run a drill on a quiet night that his own residents would hate, and he would not care that they hated it, and he would think of her every time. By full morning the story had gone through the hospital the way a fire goes through dry grass, faster than anyone could carry it on purpose. 11 ventilated patients, total power loss, the new generators drowned, 5 hours of manual ventilation in the dark, every patient alive, and at the center of it the night shift nurse, the one they had been quietly planning to retire, the one with the paper book. The day shift nurses who came in and heard it looked at Marin differently, and the ones her own age did not look surprised at all. They looked like people who had always known, and were only relieved that someone else finally did too. The young ones, the ones who had picked up the words relic and museum because an attending had said them first, could not quite meet her eye, which was its own kind of apology, and she let them have that too. She did not bring up the names. She never would. The names had been theirs to give, and they were theirs to take back, and she had work to do. Gregory Lindqvist came up to the 4th floor at 9 in the morning. He had not slept. He had spent the night in the command center watching his prepared hospital come apart one system at a time, and he had the gray face of a man who has just learned, all at once, the exact dimensions of a thing he was told and did not hear. He found Marin at the counter. He stood there in his charcoal suit, which was rumpled now, and he said, "The fuel transfer pumps?" "In the East Equipment Bay." And Marin said, "I know." And Lindqvist said, "You told me, in the spring. You came to my office and you told me they were below the line, and I said it couldn't happen." His voice was very careful, the voice of a man holding something heavy and level. "It happened exactly the way you said it would. The surge came up the drainage and into the bay and took the pumps, and the generators ran dry, and—" He stopped. He took off his rimless glasses and cleaned them on his rumpled shirt, not because they were dirty, but because he needed somewhere to put his hands. "I have spent 2 years," he said, "telling this staff that we were redundant, that we had layers, and the one person who actually understood where the layers all met was a nurse I was being advised to make redundant. And there it was, the word, handed back to him by his own mouth, and Moran did not reach for it, did not press it. She only looked at him steadily and waited. because some things a man has to set down himself. The drill stays, Lindqvist said finally. I'll sign it this morning. Mandatory, every quarter, every shift you run it. And the pumps move above the flood line by the end of the month if I have to carry the diesel up the stairs myself. He put his glasses back on. He looked at her, this tired, careful man who was not a bad man, only one who had run a building too large for any one mind to hold all at once, and who had just learned where the load was actually carried. I should have listened in the spring, he said. I'm listening now. And he did not say sorry, not exactly, because sorry was too small and they both knew it, but he had said the true thing, which was harder, and Marin accepted it the way she accepted everything, with a small nod and no fuss, and she said, "Move the pumps. That's the apology I want. Move the pumps so the next nurse who stands here in the dark doesn't have to." And Lindqvist nodded and wrote something in his own little notebook, and Marin watched him write it, a man who managed by numbers learning, at 52, to keep a book, and she did not smile, but something behind her eyes went quiet, and it was its own kind of answer. It was not the end. That was the thing about being proven right that the young attending and the young resident were only beginning to understand, and that Moran had understood for a very long time. Vindication is not a door you walk through into a different life. It is a moment, witnessed, real, and then the shift ends, and there are still patients, and there is still a book to fill, and there is still, always, the next necessary thing. The hospital would write its report and revise its plans and put her name in a paragraph she would never read aloud to anyone. Aaron Vance would become, over the next year, the rarest of things, a brilliant young doctor who had learned in time that he was not the most important person in the room, and he would learn it from a woman in soft shoes, and the patients of every hospital he ever worked in for the rest of his life would be safer because of one night he spent breathing two strangers in the dark while she counted. None of that was the end either. The end, if it was anything, was smaller and quieter and entirely Marin's, and it happened a few hours later when the storm had blown itself out to the north, and the day staff had the ward, and there was, finally, nothing left that only she could do. She did not go home right away. She should have. She was past 60, and she had not sat down in 11 hours, and her arms ached in a way they would go on aching for 2 days. But she did not go home, because there is a thing that happens to a person after a night like that, a need to come down slowly, the way a diver comes up slowly, and she knew herself well enough to honor it. So she did what Eleanor had done with her on a supply room floor 35 years before. She found Theo. Theodora Okafor, who had not frozen, who had been the steadiest of the young ones, who had moved bed 11 6 feet to the left while bagging a man through a ceiling collapse and had not lost the rhythm once, was sitting against the wall of the break room with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands, staring at nothing, and Marin lowered herself down beside her with a small grunt and her own bad knees, and for a while neither of them said anything. Then Theo said, "I didn't know if I could do it. When the lights went out, I thought I was going to be useless." And Marin said, "You weren't. You were the opposite of useless. You were the one I didn't have to watch." And Theo turned her head and looked at her. This woman she had worked beside for 6 years and apparently never fully seen. And she said, "Where did you learn it? Really?" And Marin, for once, told her. Not all of it, but she told her about Eleanor Price, about the flood in the spring of 1991, about a woman 51 years old grabbing a young woman of 19 by the arm in the dark and saying, "The machine is not the air, we are the air, move." She told her about the front pages of the green logbook written in 2 hands, and when she was done, Theo was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing that mattered more to Marin than anything Lindqvist or Vance had said all morning. She said, teach me the order, so there's 3 hands in the book." And Marin breathed out, slow, and looked at this young woman asking to carry the weight. and she understood that this too was a kind of survival, maybe the only kind that lasted, and she said, "Yes, I'll teach you the order. We start Monday." That was the inventory of the people who carried it through in the end, because a night like that is never one person's, no matter how the story gets told afterward. There was Theo, who did not freeze. There was Spencer Reyes, who took Walt's bag and breathed for him for 90 seconds with wet eyes and a set jaw, and learned in the worst possible way the answer to the question he had asked. There was the young aide of 23 who cracked and came back because someone knelt down in front of her in the dark and told her the dark ended. There was Aaron Vance, who was wrong and then was not too proud to be wrong, which is rarer than being right. There were 4 firefighters who carried a generator up an east stair through a flood, the way 4 firefighters had once before. And under all of them, holding all of them, there was a woman they had called Obsolete, who had spent 38 years becoming exactly the person that one night required, quietly, without applause, while everyone looked at the machines. They had all been the air that night, but she had been the one who remembered how. She stayed through the long, bright wreckage of the day, and she watched the city begin to dig itself out under a sky scrubbed clean and impossibly blue, the way it always is after the worst storms, as if the weather were innocent. And it was only as the afternoon wore down toward evening, as the light through the tall windows of the 4th-floor ward went from white to gold and began at last to soften and fade, that Marin finally gathered her things to go home. She went to bed 12 first. Walt Kessler was asleep, breathing on his machine, his color good, and she stood over him for a moment in the gold light and did not wake him, only rested 2 fingers very lightly on the back of his hand, the way you touch something to be sure it is still there, and his hand, even in sleep, squeezed once at the contact, and then went still. 61 years old, she thought, looking at her own hand on his, the same hand that had been 19 on a different ward in a different dark. 61 years old, and they had thought she was finished, and she had not been finished. She had been exactly, precisely ready, the way a whole long life can be aimed at a single night without your ever being sure why, until it comes. She walked back to the nurse's station as the last of the gold went out of the windows, and the first ordinary lights of evening came up, steady and electric, and taken for granted again, the way they are taken for granted by everyone who has never heard them die. The green logbook was where she had left it, open on the counter, the night's record finished in her small, even hand, the order of it set down while she still remembered the order. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she did the thing she had decided, somewhere in the night, that she would do. She did not put it in her bag. She left it there, open, on the counter, where the next nurse coming on would find it, where Theo would find it, turned to the front pages now, the water-stained ones written in 2 hands that would soon be 3. The book was for the patient. The day might come the forms could not be reached, and on that day whoever stood in this dark, the order would be there, waiting, in more than one hand, because the one thing Marin Holloway had refused to let them automate, the one thing she had carried through every quiet shift they had called her obsolete for working, was the knowledge that a machine can keep a hospital running, but only a person can keep it alive, and that the difference between the two does not show, cannot show, until the night the lights go out. She clipped the little hand-crank flashlight off her lanyard and set it down on top of the open book, where the next nurse would see it and wonder, and someday ask and be told. Then she pulled on her coat and walked out through the ward she had held through the dark, past the machines breathing their steady borrowed breaths, past the beds of the people who were alive because for 5 hours a row of human hands had been the air, and she went home, an old night shift nurse in soft shoes that made no sound, carrying nothing, having left the only thing that mattered exactly where it would be needed. The lights stayed on behind her. They always do until they don't. And the ones who notice that, the ones who keep the book and run the drill and stay calm in the dark, are almost never the ones the room is looking at. Right up until the night, they are the only thing holding the roof up. So here is the question, and it is a real one, the kind worth sitting with after the screen goes dark. When the lights are on and everything is working and the certain people are talking over the quiet ones, who in your life is the one actually holding the roof up? The one nobody is looking at, the one who would know the order in the dark. And when that night comes, and it always comes, the night the machines go silent and someone has to be the heir, would you rather be the one who was certain or the one who was ready?